But we have to get to our top story tonight, which is Donald Trump fear-mongering about crime and homelessness in the nation's capital. The president put out an unhinged and inaccurate post earlier today on his social media site. He teased a press conference coming at the White House tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., where he's set to make some sort of announcement and threatened all homeless people to leave the city immediately. Trump also went after Mayor Muriel Bowser, saying she has been given many chances and the crime numbers get worse and the city only gets dirtier and less attractive. Never mind the fact that violent crime in D.C. has actually been on a steep decline since 2023, according to the Metropolitan Police Department. In fact, it's dropped 26% just this year so far when compared to 2024. Here's how the D.C. mayor responded to Trump this morning.
This is what I know. We are not experiencing a crime spike. One reason I wanted to be here today is to let people know that their nation's capital is among the most beautiful and best cities in the world. We have experienced rises in tourism compared to before the pandemic. So people are coming to our capital, they're starting business in our capital, and they're raising families in our capital. And any comparison to a war-torn country is hyperbolic and false. We're going to keep talking to the president, working with his people on the issues that are high priority for him. Now, if the priority is to show force in an American city, we know he can do that here. But it won't be because there's a spike in crime.
And joining us now is Basil Smikle, MSNBC political analyst and professor of practice at Columbia School of Professional Studies and friend of the show, of course.
Thank you.
They all know you.
Good to be friends.
It's good to have you here tonight. So what are you bracing for with this 10 a.m. press conference from Trump? And what do you think the point of this focus on crime and homelessness in D.C. really is all about?
Well, let me answer that part of the question first. It just goes to Elise's point. During this Epstein era, there's a lot of scattershot, right? We're going to throw everything at the wall. He's coming after the Attorney General in New York, Tish James. So all of these big announcements, to me, are an attempt to kind of deflect attention away from some of the things that we should be focused on in this country, like Epstein, number one, but also the economy, the jobs reports, and so on and so forth. Another zoom out point. He does this with black mayors, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
He's going after Muriel Bowser. He's gone after the mayor of Baltimore, of Cleveland, right? All a part of this bigger conversation he's trying to have about DEI or anti-DEI, and they're there, but they don't deserve the position that they're in, right? So this falls into that category and continues to pull on his thread because it's red meat for his base. But on the issue of homelessness itself, he's talked about this about New York at one point, and it has the hallmark of Giuliani's criminalization of the poor and of homeless when he was mayor of New York City. So this targeting of urban areas, this targeting of urban centers, we are at a point in time we need to be talking about solutions, but not using the police as the tip of the spear to basically just go into these cities and moving people off the street without question as to where are they going to go afterwards.
I'm so glad that you brought the issue of race as a subtext to this conversation, because for years, D.C. has been the target of these sorts of, we need to be in control, and that we as the federal government. Can you sort of break down for our audience how the demographic of D.C.'s population, particularly now with a leader who happens to be a black woman at the helm, plays for a ripe and fertile ground for this sort of discussion to go further than it has in previous years?
I always remember a comment that Dave Chappelle actually made, because he's like, there's statistically no poor people in D.C., but white people. No poor white people in D.C. I don't know how true that is. But he was making the point, though, that with everything that, for all of the culture that D.C. has, for all of its history, most of the white residents that you see there are somehow connected to federal government, somehow, connected to the industry of the politics of D.C., and are therefore doing pretty well. But if you look at the rest of D.C., yes, you've got a burgeoning sort of black middle class, but it also, there's a community that is very rich in culture, and there are many points at which that culture is being attacked. Not just by people sort of moving there, because there are a lot of conversations about gentrification, But there's also this question of whether or not the federal government should sort of impose itself on the people and the culture of that city, the people in the culture, the people who've made it such a strong American city. And so this is a conversation that's taken place for quite some time, but it's a conversation I'm glad to see the mayor pushing back on so strongly.
So what does this look like if you have, last night, 450, let me get this correct, federal officers were deployed to the streets of Washington. It's not a big city, Washington, D.C. That's a pretty significant increase in, boots on the ground, so to speak. How does this play out, and what is the timeline for this deployment?
Well, and you all talked about this a bit, it's the theater of it, right?
Yes.
These individuals, this law enforcement in force on an American street. We talked about that a bit in New York when there were questions about crime in the subways, and you started to see National Guard members in our subway stations. There are a lot of folks that felt comfortable about that, but others that said, why are we doing this, right? Because why should we have this kind of show of force? But if you take a city like Washington, D.C., that is smaller, and you start having folks with shotguns or automatic rifles in their streets, what is the point of that if not to show force at a point where crime is down and you actually don't need to show force in that way? So there's a theater that I think he's trying to create to, again, deflect attention, to scare people, right? Because we see that with ICE as well and what he does with ICE, to scare people and to engage in what a friend of mine called anticipatory obedience. In anticipation of me showing force or inserting my will, you're going to behave.
Advanced compliance.
Right.
Compliance before the demand.
That's right.
I think one of the most important things about this is what happens in other American cities if this works here? If this can be done here, where you have other American cities that have high populations of unhoused people, what sort of precedent does this create in terms of how mayors will choose to deal with that? So this is such an important conversation.
Well, we've seen the sort of aggression toward the homeless and mentally ill populations in the U.S. Increase. Honestly, some Democrats are actually at fault for some of that dehumanization as well. But Basil, I mean, you and Charles have touched on this, but can you kind of spell out in stark terms, what does it mean for young Black families in D.C., young kids, or, young career professionals who are riding public transportation are going to come face to face with some of these officers with the guns you just described? Yeah. What does this mean for them?
Well, I think about James Baldwin when he wrote, Notes from an Occupied Territory. That feeling that you have this law enforcement with this bold occupying force on your streets. What does that say? What message does that send to a little kid? I was talking to somebody earlier today about the fact that I've never been in Central Park. Why haven't I been in Central Park? Because of the now exonerated 5 and the atmosphere.
And you work at Columbia.
I know, but that atmosphere, but I'm their same age, and the atmosphere in the city around that time, when you had the media, the elected officials, including the mayor, Koch at the time, and the police department coming down on young Black boys and basically saying, this part of the city is ours, you're not supposed to be here.
Well, you missed one name that was coming down on young Black boys at that time, Donald Trump.
And Donald Trump, right. But and what's interesting is all of this was happening even without his ad in the paper calling for those young men to be executed. So there was sort of a whole establishment around instilling fear, not just in white New Yorkers, but in Black New Yorkers, particularly young Black men, to say, these spaces are off limits to you. So I'm saying all of that to say that that is me reacting to something that I felt back when I was 17, 18 years old. So now you have these law enforcement officers with these very powerful rifles potentially walking through the streets of DC. What message are you sending to the young Black men in particular, but everybody? What are you sending to young people in those streets today?
Very interesting. I would have loved to see how this level of vigilance would have played out if we saw it at the same time on January 6th, but that's another conversation.